Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into an incident that really exposed the massive gap between perceived security and actual security, an event that pretty quickly became a full-blown national crisis in Australia, the 2022 Optus data breach.
Yeah, it was huge.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about one of the most significant cyber events in Australian history. It affected up to 10 million current and former customers.
Yeah, 10 million.
That number is just staggering. It's roughly 1/3 of the nation's entire population. And their most sensitive personal information was exposed in a single catastrophic security failure.
What's really fascinating here, and what the source material makes absolutely clear, is that this was definitively not some highly sophisticated, state-sponsored kind of heist, despite what Optus initially tried to spin.
Right, the initial story was different.
Exactly. So our deep dive mission today is to look past that rhetoric and find the root cause. And all the evidence points not to a failure of, advanced tech, but a massive failure stemming from really basic security hygiene. Foundational stuff.
Basic errors.
Yeah, and just basic organizational governance failures. And then we absolutely have to analyze the unprecedented legal so what that followed this whole thing. It's quite something.
And the data exposed. It was the crown jewels of personal information, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not talking about easily changed passwords or, non-critical details. The sources confirmed the exposure included names, addresses, emails, phone numbers, dates of birth. All the usual suspects.
But the critical part, the real danger zone,
Yeah.
was the theft of government-issued documents, current driver's licenses, current passports, and Medicare numbers.
That's the stuff you really can't change easily.
Precisely. This is the ultimate toolkit for identity theft. It's the kind of information criminals absolutely treasure because it's hard to change, and it provides that solid proof of identity.
It's the high-value asset.
Exactly. And that's why the immediate tension we see in the source material is so vital to understand. Optus's CEO initially labeled the breach as advanced and complicated, right?
Trying to frame it like they were victims of some super-skilled hackers.
Yeah, like a formidable external force hit them. Yet, subsequent analysis from government officials, independent experts, and confirmed by our own sources call it human error.
Human error.
And the result of simple technical misconfiguration. Just basic mistakes.
Wow.
So that profound gap, that disconnect between the corporate narrative and the technical reality, that defines this entire deep dive.
Okay, let's start with a sequence of events, because the timeline itself is, well, pretty fraught with tension.
It really is.
The sources give us a tense overview of how quickly this escalated, but also, crucially, how long the underlying risk was just sitting there.
Right.
Data exfiltration, the actual theft of the data, seems to have begun sometime between September 17th and 20th, 2022. But what's disturbing, really disturbing, is that DNS records suggest the vulnerability itself, the open door, essentially was active for maybe up to 3 months before it was exploited.
3 months. So the vulnerability wasn't some sudden thing. It was a long-term exposure just waiting to happen.
An accident waiting to happen.
Pretty much. The initial activity of the suspicious network behavior was detected on September 20th.
Okay.
And Optus moved relatively quickly at that point, to be fair. Within 2 days, September 22nd, they went public.
Right, warning customers to be vigilant.
Exactly, which of course instantly created mass panic. Understandably.
And that panic was immediately weaponized, wasn't it?
It was. The real drama escalated incredibly quickly. On September 24th, a user going by Optus data surfaced on breach forums.
Which is a pretty notorious dark web cybercrime site.
Oh yeah, well known. And they demanded a significant ransom, AU $1.5 million in Monero cryptocurrency.
Monero, harder to trace.
Exactly. And to prove they weren't bluffing, they released a small sample, about 200 customer records.
Just to show they had the goods.
Right, and they threatened to leak 10,000 more records daily if they weren't paid immediately. High-pressure tactics.
Okay, but this is where the story gets weird, right? It deviates from the typical script.
It really does. This is where it stops looking like a typical professional cybercrime syndicate operation. Just 3 days after demanding the ransom, September 27th, the attacker did something highly unusual. Very strange.
What happened?
They retracted the ransom demand entirely, deleted all their posts on the forum.
Took it back.
Yeah, and issued what basically amounted to an apology, said it was a mistake, and cited too many eyes.
Too many eyes. Meaning the heat was too much.
Exactly. The intense scrutiny from media, law enforcement, government agencies, It was clearly overwhelming for them.
Wait, let's stop you there. This feels key.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO is on record claiming they were hit by a sophisticated criminal, right?
Yes.
Yet the actual criminal posts a ransom demand, then deletes the data they were holding hostage and says, oops, my bad, too much attention.
Pretty much, yeah.
Doesn't that just immediately blow up the narrative of a sophisticated enterprise? It sounds much more like an opportunist who panicked, someone who got in way over their head.
It absolutely does. And that discrepancy became central to the criticism of Optus's handling of the whole situation.
Right.
Because a seasoned cybercriminal group, they would never just delete their leverage like that. It makes no sense.
They doubled down, surely.
Exactly. The sources strongly suggest this was likely an opportunistic actor, maybe not even that skilled, who found a wide open door, grabbed the loot, but just didn't have the maturity or the infrastructure to actually handle the pressure, let alone monetize the data effectively.
So it really undercuts the official corporate line.
Massively. It makes the sophisticated attack claim look pretty thin.
Okay, so regardless of the attacker's actual skill level, the damage was done. Irreversible.
Absolutely.
And the sources force us to look closely at the tiered risk profile here. Because while 10 million people were affected, not everyone faced the exact same immediate threat, did they?
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction. If we look at the scale of the identity management risk, the sources clarify the breakdown pretty well. 2.1 million customers had some form of identity document exposed, which is terrible, obviously.
Yeah, still huge.
But the criticality, the real immediate danger, skyrockets when you isolate the subgroup of 1.2 million customers.
Okay, what was special about them?
They had at least one current valid ID document stolen. So a current passport, a current driver's license, or a current Medicare number.
The active documents. And what's the real difference between a criminal getting hold of a current valid ID versus an expired one?
It's about immediacy and utility for the criminal. A current valid ID can be used right now to open new bank accounts, apply for loans, get a new phone contract, establish a new line of credit, basically impersonating the victim almost seamlessly.
Much easier to commit fraud immediately.
Exactly. Now, the remaining 900,000 customers, they had expired ID numbers exposed.
Still bad, presumably.
Still dangerous, absolutely, because unfortunately some organizations don't check expiration dates as thoroughly as they should, but it generally requires more effort from the criminal to use those expired IDs for high-level fraud.
Got it.
So those 1.2 million with the current valid IDs, they face the most immediate and profound risk of serious identity theft.
That is a huge burden of risk for over 1 million people.
Immense.
And the immediate financial fallout for Optus reflected that scale, didn't it? They had to set aside a lot of money very quickly.
They did. The company was forced to reserve a massive $140 million almost immediately just for remediation efforts.
$140 million.
Wow. And that wasn't just like a symbolic gesture. It was a concrete recognition of the immediate need for massive crisis management.
What did that money cover?
Well, it covered commissioning the Deloitte review, the investigation into the incident's root cause.
Okay.
It covered providing free Equifax credit monitoring services to the most affected customers for a year, trying to give them some protection. And it covered the actual cost of replacing all those compromised identity documents, nationwide passports, licenses.
It's a physical replacement cost.
Yeah, which adds up fast. That $140 million was really the first concrete sign that the financial liability for Optus was going to be absolutely colossal.
Okay, here's where it gets, well, really interesting, I think. Moving from the consequences to the, frankly, astonishing simplicity of the root cause.
It is pretty astonishing.
When the forensic teams dug into the incident, the sources confirmed the breach didn't involve complex zero-day exploits or sophisticated phishing attacks or, highly tailored malware, none of that.
Yep.
It stemmed from exploiting a single, unprotected, public-facing API. That's it.
That is it. This is like the textbook definition of a failure of foundational security controls. It's security 101 stuff.
An API, can you just briefly explain what that is for listeners?
Sure. An API, application programming interface, is basically a set of rules that allows different software applications to talk to each other. It's like a messenger that takes requests and tells the system what you want it to do, and then returns the response.
Okay, so a way for systems to connect.
Right. And the API in question here was located at an external endpoint, api.gambit.optus.com.au. This endpoint, which absolutely should have been secured and segregated from sensitive data, was essentially a direct open pipeline straight into Optus's internal customer databases, the ones holding all that PII we talked about.
Directly connected. No buffer.
Seems like it. It violated the most basic principle of network architecture. You never, ever expose internal customer data directly to an unauthenticated public endpoint. It's just asking for trouble.
But the failure wasn't just exposing the API, was it? It was like a perfect storm, a combination of multiple basic flaws that created this incredibly easy automated data theft pathway.
Exactly. It wasn't just one thing wrong. It was several things wrong, working together catastrophically.
So we need to detail this technical stack of failure, as you called it. What made the attack method so simple?
Okay, so the first, most glaring technical flaw was the complete absence of authentication.
No login needed.
None. In technical terms, this is sometimes called broken user authentication, or BUA. No login, no password, no cryptographic token, no multi-factor authentication. Absolutely nothing was required to connect to this API.
So if you knew the address.
If you knew the address or could find it, you could connect. That's it. This is a fundamental gatekeeping failure. It's like, I don't know, leaving a bank vault door standing wide open in the middle of a busy street with no guard.
Wow. Okay, so no lock on the door.
No lock. And the absence of that lock, that gate, allowed the second critical flaw to become truly catastrophic.
Which was?
Predictable identifiers. This is where the mass scraping, the pulling out of millions of records actually happened. Optus failed what is known as broken object level authorization, or BOA.
BOA. Okay, that sounds technical.
It is, but the concept is critical, and you need to absorb this one because it's huge. BLA is currently ranked as the #1 API vulnerability on the entire OWASP list.
WAS.
The Open Web Application Security Project. They're the global standard setters for web security. So this is the top known API risk.
And what does it mean, BOA?
It means the attacker didn't have to guess complex usernames or unique random database keys for each customer.
No.
They simply found that the customer records were sequentially numbered, like customer ID 1, customer ID 2, customer ID 3, and so on. Just simple numbers in order.
Can you give us an analogy? Make BOA really clear for someone who isn't a security expert.
Okay, sure. Imagine you walk into a massive computerized mailroom, right? Each customer sensitive file is in a sequentially numbered box. Box 1, box 2, box 3, millions of them.
Got it.
Now, proper authorization rules are supposed to give you a special key, let's say, that only opens your designated box. Say box 47, you can't open anyone else's.
Makes sense.
Broken object level authorization, BOLA, means you can walk into that mailroom maybe without even showing ID because of the lack of authentication.
Like the first failure.
And you just ask the system, show me box 1. And the system, because it's broken, assumes, well, if you requested it, you must be allowed to see it.
Oh, dear.
Then you simply tell the computer, okay, great, now show me box 2, now box 3, now box 4, and you just keep going, incrementing the number.
So the system completely failed to enforce the fundamental security rule that an authenticated user, or in this case, the unauthenticated query, should only be allowed to access their own data object, their own box.
Exactly. Nailed it.
By using those simple sequential IDs, the attacker could just write a simple script, a program to automatically ask for record 1, then 2, then 3, and just download millions of different customers' data continuously.
Precisely. The system treated every single one of those sequential number requests as a legitimate authorized action. It was an industrial-scale failure of authorization checking. Made it utterly trivial to script the data scraping.
So no lock on the door, and the files inside are numbered 1, 2, 3.
A terrible combination.
And if that dual failure wasn't bad enough, the sources point to an organizational failure, something that had been sitting there, like a time bomb, for years.
Yes. A critical coding error, one which weakened access controls, was apparently introduced way back in 2018.
2018, 4 years earlier.
4 years,
Yeah.
and it was on a secondary, sort of forgotten, vulnerable subdomain. And this error went completely unpatched for all that time.
Left there.
Left there. It was essentially a ticking time bomb, a forgotten maintenance item on a forgotten piece of digital infrastructure.
But surely they fix vulnerabilities.
Well, here's the kicker. The sources indicate that a similar vulnerability was actually fixed on Optus's main active domain in 2021. They found it and fixed it there.
Okay.
But that fix, that critical security update, was never applied to this dormant subdomain where the original 2018 error still existed. We'll get to that, but it points to major systemic issues.
Yeah.
This unpatched weakness created the precise open entry point the attacker ultimately stumbled upon and exploited in 2022.
So the attack method itself wasn't sophisticated at all. It sounds like simple scanning for open doors, finding this API, realizing the IDs were just 1, 2, 3,
Yep.
and then writing a script for a mass download. You mentioned earlier the attacker rotated through tens of thousands of IP addresses.
Yeah.
Why was that necessary, and why didn't Optus's systems catch that massive download?
Okay, that detail is crucial because it speaks to the sophistication of the attacker's technique, even if the underlying vulnerability they exploited was incredibly basic.
Right, the how versus the what.
Exactly. Most simple network defenses, like basic firewalls or things called rate limiters, are designed to look for one single IP address that is hammering the server excessively. Sending hundreds or thousands of requests per second from one place.
Looking for volume from a single source.
Right. That's the classic denial of service or brute force pattern. So by rotating through tens of thousands of different IP addresses, probably using a botnet or proxy network,
Okay.
the attacker ensured that each individual IP address only requested maybe a handful of data records, a tiny amount.
Distributing the load.
Precisely. So to Optus's automated detection systems, it wouldn't have looked like one malicious actor performing a massive data scrape. It would have looked like maybe hundreds or thousands of different, seemingly legitimate, low-volume users accessing the system normally.
Clever. Sneaky.
It bypassed the basic volumetric detection systems that were programmed to look for that classic single-source flood attack. It made the malicious activity blend in with normal traffic, at least for a while.
So it was essentially a digital slow burn smash and grab distributed across a huge network of disposable addresses to avoid setting off the basic alarms. That's a good way to put it. The simplicity of the vulnerability combined with the sheer scale of the exploit. It's truly breathtaking and terrifying.
It really is. A perfect storm of basic errors leading to a national crisis. And when we connect this incident to the bigger picture, the sources make it clear. The core problem wasn't just that one technical flaw, or even the combination of flaws. It was the cascading systemic governance failure that allowed those flaws to exist and persist, forgotten, for years.
Right. Let's focus on that longevity you mentioned. A 4-year-old coding error on some secondary subdomain remained unfixed. That points directly to a complete collapse in things like auditing, system lifecycle management, and especially asset inventory control, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is the classic textbook failure of asset inventory. It's often called shadow IT.
Shadow IT, meaning stuff the IT department doesn't know about or manage.
Exactly. Or stuff they set up once and then forgot about. As we said, a similar security vulnerability was addressed on the main operational Optus domain in 2021. They knew about that kind of flaw.
But they missed this one.
They missed applying the fix to this secondary, apparently dormant, forgotten subdomain. This strongly indicates that Optus lacked a comprehensive, accurate inventory of all their digital assets, all their internet-facing systems.
Which sounds bad.
It's incredibly dangerous. If you don't know what systems you have online, or if you think they're dormant or deprecated, but they're actually still live, you certainly cannot secure them properly.
You can't protect what you don't know you have.
Precisely. These forgotten, unmonitored assets become massive, high-risk liabilities. They're essentially digital landmines just waiting for anyone to step on them.
That concept of shadow IT is terrifying for any large organization, really. It means your company's biggest cybersecurity risk might be some old server box running ancient code that someone forgot to decommission 5 years ago.
That is exactly the risk. In modern cybersecurity, the adage is absolutely true. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. The Optus breach provided a very painful, very public, multi-million-dollar lesson in the extreme danger of forgotten digital assets.
Okay, this leads us directly into the second massive systemic issue, the one that really fueled the public and political firestorm. Why on earth did Optus retain so much sensitive data in the first place? Especially for former customers.
Yes, the data retention question. This massively amplified the scale of the catastrophe. Critically, as you said, millions of the compromised records, including highly sensitive PII like passport and driver's license numbers, belonged to former Optus customers, people whose service contracts had ended long ago.
So they were hoarding data they arguably had no current business need for anymore.
That appears to be the case. Holding on to data unnecessarily wasn't just a potential compliance issue. In this case, it became a strategic risk amplifier of the highest order.
How so?
The sheer volume of exposed sensitive data turned what was already a serious security incident into a genuine national-level crisis, precisely because of the huge pool of compromised identities available to the attacker. More data meant more victims, more potential fraud, more panic.
And there were laws about this, right?
Yeah.
About deleting old data.
There are. The sources specifically quote the relevant Commonwealth law in Australia, the Privacy Act. It requires companies to take reasonable steps to destroy or de-identify personal information when it is no longer needed for the purpose it was collected.
Reasonable steps. Seems Optus might have failed that test.
Well, their retention practices, keeping detailed ID documents for years after customers left, clearly exposed a gaping hole between what the law expected and what the company was actually practicing.
What's the justification companies usually give for holding on to old customer data like that?
Sometimes it's perceived future marketing value, although the value of years-old ID data for marketing is questionable. Often it's just inertia. It's easier to keep it than to set up robust deletion processes. Sometimes there are complex legal retention requirements for certain types of data, but keeping passport copies for years often falls outside that.
But the cost of that inertia in this case was devastatingly clear.
Absolutely. Astronomical.
So the key takeaway here, for every CEO, every board member listening, regardless of their industry, must be data minimization is crucial.
Without a single doubt. That strategic imperative became crystal clear overnight across the entire Australian corporate landscape, and globally too. The risk associated with the data you hold is directly proportional to its volume and its sensitivity. It's that simple.
So less data, less risk.
Exactly. The simplest, most effective mitigation strategy is often one. If an organization doesn't hold sensitive customer data, it can't lose it.
Obvious when you say it like that.
Right. Your data retention policy must view personal data primarily as a profound liability, one that actually increases in risk every single day it is retained unnecessarily beyond its legitimate purpose.
Okay, let's just quickly summarize the other technical controls beyond the big governance failures that we're clearly missing here. Things that align with those OS best practices you mentioned.
Sure. We've already hit the big two, the broken user authentication, BUA, meaning the lack of MFA or tokens on the API.
Right, the open door.
And the broken object-level authorization, BOA, the failure to enforce object-level access control, letting them grab record 1, 2, 3.
The sequentially numbered files.
Yeah. But beyond those, we also clearly saw delayed patching for known, years-old errors. A modern, mature security program demands rigorous, timely patch management and lifecycle control for all assets, not just the main ones.
Basic maintenance, essentially.
Basic, but critical. And another point, really important, Optus apparently lacked a vulnerability disclosure program, or what's often called a bug bounty system.
What's that?
It's a program where ethical security researchers, white hat hackers, can find vulnerabilities in your systems and report them to you privately and safely, usually for a reward, a bounty.
So they tell you the problem instead of exploiting it.
Exactly. And interestingly, when the initial attacker Optus data retracted the ransom demand, they specifically lamented the fact that there was no secure, ethical channel for them to report the vulnerability they found.
Really? They actually said that.
According to reports, yes. Which strongly suggests that had such a program existed at Optus, this specific flaw might potentially have been found and fixed safely by a researcher long before a malicious actor stumbled upon it and exploited it.
Wow. So a vulnerability disclosure program essentially acts as relatively cheap insurance.
You could see it that way.
Instead of Optus eventually facing, AU $140 million in immediate costs, potential class actions, and maybe even a multi-trillion-dollar theoretical lawsuit, they might have just paid an ethical researcher a few $1,000s, maybe tens of thousands at most, to quietly tell them about and help them fix a critical flaw years earlier.
That contrast certainly speaks volumes about the potential return on investment for prioritizing proactive security measures like bug bounties. It reframes security spending not just as a cost center, but as risk mitigation.
Okay, moving into the immediate aftermath and the response, we have to return to that stark contradiction in the narrative we touched on earlier.
Yeah, the sophisticated actor claim.
Right. Optus initially maintained they were dealing with a skilled criminal, didn't they? They even pointed to that IP address cycling technique as proof of the attacker's sophistication.
They did. But that narrative just completely collapsed under the weight of the attacker's own actions.
That's so.
As we discussed, the primary attacker, this Optus data persona, didn't just fail to follow through on their threats. They retracted the AU $1.5 million ransom demand, claimed to have deleted the stolen data and actually apologized for the mistake.
Not exactly the behavior of a hardened cybercriminal mastermind.
Not at all. This behavior strongly suggests an opportunistic, probably quite panicked actor. Maybe a script kiddie, someone using readily available hacking tools without deep understanding, or perhaps just an amateur who suddenly found themselves facing the full, terrifying weight of federal and international law enforcement attention.
And this gave critics more ammunition against Optus.
Oh, absolutely. It provided further evidence that the company's internal security must have been catastrophically inadequate if this was the actor who could breach them so easily. It made the official, skilled criminal claim feel much more like damage control or misdirection rather than accurate assessment.
But the chaos didn't actually end with the original attacker folding, did it? The breach still enabled dangerous downstream crime.
That's a really important point. Which brings us to the case of the 19-year-old Dennis Sue. He was arrested by the Australian Federal Police.
And the police were clear he wasn't the original attacker who stole the 10 million records.
Correct. Sue was a secondary actor, a criminal opportunist who pecked later. He apparently exploited the small sample of data that had been publicly leaked by Optus data in the breach's initial stages before the main ransom was retracted.
What did he do with that leaked sample?
He used it to try and blackmail 93 individual Optus customers whose details were in that sample. He allegedly demanded $2,000 from each of them to prevent their data from being sold on to other criminals.
Wow. So preying on the victims directly.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the cascading risk of a large-scale data leak. The initial corporate failure empowers an entire secondary ecosystem of smaller, localized criminals who then profit from the fallout, adding insult to injury for the victims.
And meanwhile, the public and regulatory response to Optus's communication during this crisis was, scathing seems like an understatement based on the sources.
Scathing is fair. It was widely described as slow, confusing, often contradictory, and just completely inadequate for the scale of the crisis.
Were other agencies frustrated?
Hugely. Government agencies responsible for issuing and managing critical identity services like Services Australia, which handles Medicare cards, openly and very publicly accuse Optus of a profound lack of timely communication and transparency.
About what specifically?
About exactly which customers had which specific data points compromised. This lack of clear, actionable information from Optus created immense public fear and confusion. People didn't know, do I need to replace my passport now? Is my driver's license compromised or just my email? Do I need a new Medicare number? The lack of clarity was a huge problem.
And customer support wasn't helping much either.
The sources document absolutely chaotic customer support. People reported waiting hours on hold, dealing with chatbots providing nonsensical or unhelpful answers, and even call center representatives who seemed overwhelmed and simply unable to provide concrete solutions or reliable information.
So the human impact was immense. Individuals forced to waste huge amounts of time, energy, and personal resources trying to protect themselves from identity theft, trying to navigate this bureaucratic nightmare.
A catastrophe they had absolutely no part in creating, yes.
I want to use that specific customer quote we found in the sources because I think it perfectly captures the public's feeling of utter helplessness during this. One customer said, "Ultimately, we are sitting ducks for identity theft. And given that we can't change our dates of birth, address, or names, there isn't much we can do about it," which is incredibly frustrating.
That quote really hits home, doesn't it? It defines the complete lack of agency the victims felt. They were exposed through no fault of their own, with data that's hard or impossible to change, and felt powerless.
And this widespread sense of frustration, this feeling of being let down, it led directly to the legal battles, didn't it?
It certainly fueled the fire for them. Optus almost immediately launched a very aggressive legal defense strategy, particularly focused on shielding the internal root cause analysis report that was being conducted by the consultancy firm Deloitte.
They didn't want that report getting out.
No. They argued very strongly that this report should remain completely confidential under what's called legal professional privilege. Meaning, they claimed the sole reason they commissioned the Deloitte report was for the purpose of obtaining legal advice in preparation for the class action lawsuits they knew were coming. If it's solely for legal advice, it can often be kept private.
Okay, so that was a massive fight over corporate transparency versus legal strategy. How did the federal court respond when Optus tried to bury the findings of what actually went wrong?
The Federal Court of Australia rejected Optus's claim. This ruling, which came in November 2023, was hugely important.
Why was it so significant?
The court found that the Deloitte report was actually multi-purpose. It wasn't just commissioned solely for legal advice. The evidence showed it was also clearly intended for and used for internal management review, assessing operational failures, informing remediation efforts, and even shaping public relations messaging.
Ah, so not just for the lawyers.
Exactly. And because it served these multiple business purposes beyond just legal advice, the court ruled that legal professional privilege did not apply in the way Optus claimed. This forced Optus to partially release the report's findings, making them available for use in the pending class action lawsuits against them.
That feels like a clear victory for transparency and corporate accountability.
It was widely seen as such, a major setback for Optus's attempts to keep the internal details quiet.
Okay, that legal fight over the report leads us directly to perhaps the most unprecedented aspect of this entire saga, the sheer scale of accountability being pursued by the main regulator.
Yes, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, the OAIC, Australia's privacy watchdog.
What did they do?
They initiated civil penalty proceedings against Optus in the federal court, a major lawsuit.
Okay, but regulators sue companies after big breaches. What was so different here?
The strategy. This is the strategic game changer, the part that made headlines globally. The OAIC didn't just sue Optus for a massive single lump sum fine based on, say, corporate revenue or profit, which is the standard approach for regulators in many other jurisdictions, like under GDPR in Europe.
No. What did they do instead?
Instead, they alleged a serious interference with the privacy of each of the estimated 9.5 million affected individuals separately. They are pursuing accountability on a per-person basis.
Wait, per person. Can you explain that distinction?
Yeah.
Because that sounds like the core difference between just a large fine and something potentially existential.
It is. Standard regulatory fines, like those often seen under GDPR, are typically capped at a percentage of the company's global annual turnover, maybe 2% or 4%. A huge company like Optus could probably absorb a fine like that, even if it hurts badly.
Right. Painful but survivable.
But the OAIC leveraged the existing Australian Privacy Act, and particularly the context of proposed reforms that were underway to strengthen it, to argue something different. They argued that Optus's failure constituted a separate actionable violation, a separate contravention of the Act for every single individual whose privacy was breached.
Okay, so if the potential fine under the law for a single serious privacy contravention is, let's say, AU $2.2 million,
which was the maximum per contravention under the Act at the time, the reforms proposed raising it much higher.
right, so you take that $2.2 million figure and you multiply it by 9.5 million affected individuals.
You multiply it out very quickly, exponentially, in fact.
What's the number?
Well, if that legal strategy were fully successful, and especially if applied under the newly proposed much higher penalty regime within the Privacy Act reforms, which were accelerated partly because of this breach, the theoretical maximum fine could reach a truly staggering $20.9 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
Trillion with a T, a $20.9 trillion. Now, obviously, no one seriously expected the court to actually levy a fine of that magnitude. It's more than the entire Australian GDP.
Right, it's symbolic. But what's the symbol saying?
The OAIC wasn't seriously trying to collect a $20.9 trillion. They were using that theoretical maximum, calculated on a per-person basis, to make an incredibly powerful statement. They were fundamentally redefining the potential cost of data negligence.
Also.
They were effectively telling every single corporation operating in Australia, we now view every customer's data loss not just as a single corporate failure, but as a separate crime against that individual customer.
Yeah.
And the potential penalties will reflect that massive cumulative harm.
Wow. That astronomical figure, even just theoretically, must have fundamentally shifted the risk calculation for every single board and CEO in the country, maybe even globally.
Absolutely. It signals that massive data leakage is no longer just a manageable corporate risk, maybe covered by insurance. It's potentially a systemic liability measured in millions or tens of millions of individual breaches, forcing companies to truly internalize the potentially exponential cost of poor security governance and excessive data retention.
A huge shift in perceived risk.
Monumental.
And the ultimate corporate toll, the human toll to top, was also highly visible in this case, wasn't it?
It was. The CEO, Kelly Bayer Rosmarin, who had faced intense public and political criticism, not just for the massive data breach itself, but also for a subsequent, unrelated but very damaging major national network outage that hit Optus later.
Right, that didn't help.
No. She ultimately resigned from her position in November 2023. Her departure really symbolized the severe personal and professional cost that can now come with these kinds of systemic failures at the highest levels of corporate leadership. Accountability reached the very top.
So, after unpacking all of that, the simple flaws, the systemic failures, the chaotic response, the unprecedented legal threats, what does this all mean going forward for Optus, obviously, but also for the wider global business community?
Well, the breach undoubtedly acted as a definitive catalyst, a shock to the system. It forced a wholesale, rapid reevaluation of digital responsibility and basic security practices across the entire corporate landscape, certainly in Australia, but the ripples went global.
What are the key lessons that seem to have been absorbed?
I think the first critical lesson absorbed globally is that API security is absolutely paramount, non-negotiable.
Especially given how central the API was here.
Exactly. The concept of dormant or forgotten APIs being silent threats is now much more widely understood thanks to incidents like this. They simply must be treated with a rigorous zero-trust philosophy.
Zero trust.
Meaning you don't automatically trust anything, inside or outside your network. Every single API, regardless of its perceived age, its intended use, or its supposed deprecation status, must implement rigorous authentication and authorization controls. Strict adherence to things like the OWASPA Top 10 guidelines for API security is now seen as table stakes. No more exceptions for easy access or internal tools.
Okay, so lock down every single API. Lesson 1. What's 2?
Lesson 2 directly addresses that governance failure. The absolute necessity of a comprehensive, accurate asset inventory.
Getting rid of that shadow IT.
Precisely. Organizations simply cannot afford the risk of having dormant, unmonitored subdomains running with 4-year-old, unpatched coding errors anymore. The Optus case showed the potential consequence is just too high.
So the rule is?
If you cannot definitively account for a digital asset in your inventory, if you don't know who owns it, what it does, and that it's secured and patched to the highest current standard, then it's a high-risk liability that should be immediately decommissioned or urgently secured. Full visibility is key.
Makes sense. And the third big lesson, this feels like maybe the most profound strategic shift.
I agree. It's data minimization. Companies must fundamentally change how they view and manage data retention. It's not just a compliance checkbox. It's a core strategic risk decision.
Moving beyond seeing data purely as an asset.
Exactly. Organizations must regularly and rigorously destroy or properly de-identify personal data as soon as it is no longer legally required or genuinely business critical for the purpose it was collected. Stop hoarding.
It's about viewing data primarily as a potential liability.
A profound liability. Remember that simple phrase. If you don't hold the keys to sensitive data because you've deleted it, no one can steal those keys from you. This realization is now actively driving stricter data destruction policies and challenging old data hoarding habits globally. Less data, less risk surface.
And the breach didn't just change corporate policies through fear, did it? It immediately fueled a concrete legislative push in Australia.
It absolutely did. The Australian government moved quickly, proposing significant legislative reforms to its Privacy Act, including drastically increasing the maximum civil penalties for serious or repeated privacy breaches penalties that directly align with and give teeth to the scale of that per-person legal strategy the OAIC deployed against Optus.
So making that theoretical $20 trillion threat much more real, legally speaking.
Potentially, yes, making the financial consequences much more severe. And this government action also included the establishment of a new central body, the National Office of Cybersecurity, reporting directly to the Minister for Home Affairs.
What does that signify?
That institutional shift demonstrates that governments, at least in Australia, now treat major cybersecurity failures not just as a private business misfortune, but as a serious matter of national critical infrastructure resilience, economic stability, and public safety. The Optus breach provided the undeniable, painful political impetus required to push those significant reforms into law much more quickly than they might have otherwise happened.
Okay, so to recap our entire journey through this deep dive, a shockingly basic security oversight. Essentially, an unauthenticated API combined with predictable, easy-to-guess sequential customer IDs.
Yep, the BUA and BOA failures
Was massively compounded by equally basic systemic governance failures. Specifically, unpatched, years-old code on a forgotten system, and dangerously excessive data retention policies, hoarding data. And that toxic combination spiraled rapidly into a crisis of truly national scale, leading to unprecedented legal and regulatory consequences and ultimately accountability at the CEO level.
A stark warning for everyone, and I think this incident has fundamentally changed the global conversation about corporate accountability for data protection. That OAIC legal strategy seeking penalties potentially calculated per affected individual redefines the financial risk equation of data handling for every single organization worldwide.
It put a face and a potentially massive theoretical dollar value on every single compromised customer record.
Exactly. It personalized the liability in a way few things have before.
So as you, our listeners, look forward from this, you should really consider this final provocative thought. How might this new standard of accountability where a massive data leakage becomes viewed not just as one corporate failure, but as a systemic liability potentially impacting millions of people individually? How might this force CEOs and boards globally to fundamentally reevaluate their entire data retention strategies and their cybersecurity posture?
Right.
What kind of ripple effect will this precedent the idea of measuring liability, not just by corporate revenue, but by the sheer number of individual victims, have on data governance laws and corporate behavior worldwide in the coming years?
Because that decision, that legal framing, treating 9.5 million affected people as potentially 9.5 million separate contraventions, that is the threat that could change everything. It really forces organizations to move beyond just ticking compliance checklists and to truly deeply internalize the potentially exponential financial, legal, and reputational cost associated with every single piece of unnecessary personal information they choose to keep hold of.
A sobering thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.